Hello friends, tonight we're going to take a look at the CZ-70 or the VZ-70. This is a small blowback 32 ACP pistol, so you know how much I like those. But this is a gun that I both love and hate at the same time. It's really fucking weird. You can probably tell that a little bit by looking at it, but this grip, it's like it was designed by crab people from the Crab Nebula. They'd never seen humans, so they read the Wikipedia entry on human hands and were like, yeah, that looks like that would work. It doesn't work. The magazine release is really strange. It's really small and it's kind of recessed in there, so you can't get to it. There's no beaver tail, so you get awful slide bite. My God, and that double action trigger pull, it feels like it's like 23 pounds. That said, I like shooting this gun. It's kind of fun. It's super weird, so it's kind of a challenge. I enjoy it. It's a strange oddity. You know, I like how slim it is too. You can see that. And if we're really honest with ourselves, the Walther PPK, it kind of sucks too, doesn't it? It's not the most fun gun to shoot. So this has a lot of the PPK problems, plus a couple of new and exciting problems. But then it also has some interesting design decisions that arguably improve upon the Walther design. And you know, God knows it should. This was coming long after the Walther. You know, overall, this is one of the most curious of Cold War curiosities, and I enjoy that. But you know, with all these problems, you're probably saying, why? Why would you like to shoot it? I understand it's slim and it's kind of like a PPK, but it does offer strangely good performance at the range. You know, I shoot this gun a lot faster than some of the smaller modern 380s, so I'm getting more shots on target faster. That's very interesting. Even with the crazy double action trigger pull. I've been shooting revolvers for a long time, since I was pretty young, so I didn't find that double action pull to be as much of an impediment as I thought it would be. Do I like it? No, I don't. But you can work around it, and that's really cool. So what is the CZ-70? Well, like I said at the beginning, it's a blowback 32. It's a very slightly updated CZ or VZ-50. The changes really are very small between the two, but they're still noticeable, and you can obviously tell by looking at one which you've got. But 32 is one of my favorite cartridges. No, I'm not kidding about that. So I was naturally drawn to this gun. You know, after the Second World War, this was designed in the late 40s. Every European nation was like, you know, those Walthers, we got to get us some of those. We got to get us some Walther PPs. Want to touch some PPs? Get the PPs in my hand. So you see a ton of small blowback pistols rolling off of production lines. Why do I keep saying rolling off of production lines today? I'm just going to keep saying that. I don't know why the fuck I'm saying that. There were a lot of those rolling off of production lines in Europe after the Second World War. They sort of were realizing what sidearms were, that they're mostly a status symbol, they're not particularly useful in combat, so caliber doesn't matter all that much. For most circumstances, this is fine. So American doctrine around sidearms has traditionally been different most of the time. We tend to view the sidearm as a real weapon, so we always want them to be a little bit more effective than European countries have worried about. So in Europe, something like this would have been considered perfectly adequate as a sidearm at the time. And in Eastern Europe, a lot of military sidearms were also used as police pistols as well. Last year we talked about how the Makarov is not as much of a Walther PP clone as it may appear to be. It's really kind of its own thing, though it does borrow some design elements. The CZ-70 is more like the Walther. It's more of what you could call a clone, but it still is very much its own thing. In Eastern Europe, a lot of weapon designers were taking new and better ideas and updating that design. And though the CZ-70 is not as much of a hit maybe as the Makarov is, it's still really interesting. You'll see that when we look inside it. And I got this gun from the Mosin crate. Not only is Alden the nicest guy in the world, his prices are great, and he accurately labels the condition of all of his surplus stuff. I really appreciate that. He didn't pay me to say this. I don't get a discount or anything like that. I paid full price for all my stuff from the Mosin crate, just like anybody else. But I've been very, very impressed with both him and his customer service and the quality of the stuff that I've gotten from the Mosin crate. So if you can, you probably want to get your stuff there. I'm saying this partly because I had a great experience and partly because a lot of y'all have told me about your surplus purchasing horror stories from other places, so you can avoid that by buying from Alden. So talking about the CZ-70 is kind of tough. We just don't know as much about these guns relative to something like a 1911 or the Makarov or a high power. They haven't been studied to the same degree. So most of the information floating around about this gun is really just internet lore. It's just internet forum shit with no sources. There's no way to confirm any of it. If you know of any books or anything about the CZ-70, I would definitely like to know. I want to read up on the gun as much as possible. And I'm not gonna really talk a ton about the history of this one because folks just don't know. So unless it's something that we're directly seeing inside the gun or I have a very firm source on the information, I'm not gonna speculate. The thing that I hate about the internet forum lore is if you don't know, don't say that you know. Don't get on a forum and pretend to be an expert on some gun from a bygone era if you don't fucking know. Or if you're just repeating something you read on another forum. That's not information, that's just like saying my neighbor Bob told me that this gun, whatever. That's bullshit, that's not real information. And also up front you should know that this video is really for the true blowback pistol enthusiast. If you're not just completely enamored with this sort of gun, this video is going to be extremely tedious. Most of what we're doing today is looking inside this thing and all the little bits of shit in there. So if you're not into that, please don't watch this. Save yourself the time, just go do something useful with your life. But what do I find interesting about this gun? Well, though it's incredibly inconvenient and royally sucks in a lot of ways, this gun has a lot of really interesting design features that are ahead of their time. And like a lot of things that come before their time, this gun is weird and unappreciated and has some problems. Well, I really just say come before their time like that with a lot of emphasis. Wow, that's really gross. But you know what I mean, I hope. That horse is gonna pop up now, isn't it? Yeah, it fucking is. Fuck that horse. Features. The CZ-70 is a hammer-fired, blowback, double-action, single-action service pistol chambered in .32 ACP. Double action means that when the hammer is down and I pull the trigger, the hammer moves rearward with the trigger pull and then falls at the rear of travel. We're performing two actions when we pull the trigger. The double action pull is very heavy. As the hammer isn't cocked, we're working against the mainspring, doing the work that would be done by the gun cycling. In this gun, the double action pull is hilariously stiff, though it is smooth, I guess. It's like over 20 pounds. A lot of blowback guns from this era, they tend to have terrible double action trigger pulls. Walthers can be north of 15 pounds, P64s can be around 20-ish, though none of those usually are quite as bad as this. After the first shot, the hammer will be cocked. When the trigger is pulled, it only drops the hammer, performing a single action. The single action pull is light and crisp, just under 6 pounds. This gun is about 6.5 inches long, which is roughly the same length as the Walther PP. And who doesn't like to brag about the length of their PP? My gun weighs about 24 ounces, pretty much the same as the Walther PP. These guns have a very interesting finish, don't they? It's kind of curious, right? The sides of the slide and the frame are a beautiful polished blue in a very interesting and fetching shade, I think. But from the serrations up to the top of the slide, the finish isn't just matte, the tool marks are still visible. Perhaps this is to reduce glare, maybe it saves money. Surely it saves money, that's probably the only reason somebody would do something like that. I suspect these pistols would have looked old when they were new because of this aesthetic decision. The area does appear to have been finished in a way, the roughest way possible. Personally, I think this is kind of beautiful. The small parts on the upper slide are finished in the same fashion, and it makes the gun look unique, I think. I really like it. The sights are a U-notch and barleycorn situation, not my preference, but they do fine. They're small and not the most precise, but this is a small gun. They're really all this gun needs. They're perfectly fine. This gun has a safety and decocker as you would expect, but you can also carry it on safe with the hammer cocked. That can be advantageous if you struggle with the first double action trigger pull. That's it on safe. So yeah, you just flip it off safe, or you can decock it and leave it on safe. Your choice. The internet says that the magazine holds 8 rounds. But all of mine easily fit 9 rounds. And there's even a witness hole down here for the 9th round. Are these meant to hold 9? Hell if I know. But it seems to work just fine. With 9 rounds in the magazine, one of the magazines that I have is hard to release, but that's the only downside I can find, and that only applies to that one magazine. I'm not telling you to load 9 rounds. In your gun, that might not work at all. You'll have to experiment and see what works. But strangely, my CZ-10C, a very modern striker-fired pistol, its magazine release is also hard to actuate when a full magazine is inserted. It feels remarkably stiff. That's not particularly relevant. I just find it interesting. Also worth noting, internet lore says that the VZ-50 mags are different from the CZ-70 mags. The internet disagrees on how they are different, only that they are, while still being fully interchangeable. Are they different? Fuck if I know. You're going to hear me say that a lot with this gun. When we looked at the Makarov last year, we talked about how the Makarov isn't really a PP clone. Instead, the Walther PP sort of created a new style of gun, similar to how Glock founded an entire variety of pistol. The Walther PPQ and CZ-P10C aren't Glocks, but they are kind of Glock style in that they're polymer striker-fired pistols. The CZ-70 is a PP-style gun, but with that CZ design flair. Even in the late 1940s, CZ designs tended to be bold and inventive. It's just what they do. The decocker and safety have been moved from the slide to the frame. On the Walther PP, they're on the slide. And here they can be manipulated with the thumb without really breaking your grip to the same degree that you have to do to really get that PP safety to work. Now, some people can inevitably work the PP safety without having to scooch their thumb all around, but I've never been one of those people. It just doesn't work well for me with my hand in the standard position. Here, that's very easy. Unlike the PP in most related guns, you can put the 70 on safe without decocking it. That's an excellent feature. So the trigger can't be pulled, but you can still manipulate the slide, and I like that. I know I've said it twice, but this feature makes this gun far more useful because of how awful the double action trigger pull is. And you're probably going to hear me talk about that safety 50 more times because I just think it's great. The magazine release button is in the usual location for this sort of gun, but it's slightly recessed from the grip edge, and the button's a little bit smaller than we typically like. Like the Walther PP and FEG and Bursa and the rest, the button isn't as easy to press as we're used to, courtesy of this position and size. Speaking of the magazine releases, I modified my gun. You'll notice that my magazines don't just drop free, they are ejected from the gun with some force. CZ-70s have an internal magazine retention tab that forces you to pull the magazine free. The tab is a piece of spring steel that presses the back of the magazine, adding friction. I removed that and did a couple of other things that let the magazine fly right out of there. This is the loaded chamber indicator. When the extractor is gripping a cartridge, the chambered round pushes the extractor out at the front, letting the rear of it push in, which pushes out the loaded chamber indicator where you can see and feel it. This particular indicator is very large and easy to see and feel, unlike some others. Still, you probably shouldn't rely on an indicator like this for safety. Always check the chamber, check it 2 or 3 times. So this isn't a substitute for looking or feeling inside the chamber. A loaded chamber indicator is still a very useful tool to check the status of a gun. Still a great feature. This big button here is the takedown button, which replaces the Walther PP's hinged trigger guard. A warning. I'm going to look at a lot of the minutia inside this gun because I love small blowback pistols. If that's not your thing, you're probably going to want to go watch something else because this shit's going to be tedious. So So let's look inside the gun. To disassemble it, remove the magazine. Make sure the gun isn't loaded, which we've done several times, and cock the hammer, which we just did by working the slide. Press the takedown button here. You can do that with your trigger finger, which I think is really convenient. Hope you can see that. And then pull back the slide. When you reach the rear of travel, lift up the back, and the slide's just gonna come right off. It's very easy. I feel it's easier than the PP, the Makarov, the P64, and all the ones with the hinged trigger guard. It's not as easy as the Beretta Cheetah, but you know, what the hell is really. So we've got our recoil spring around the barrel, just like we expect to see. The barrel is pinned to the frame, just like we expect to see. Compared to some of the other Cold War communist pistols, the machining on the frame, at least, well, the recoil spring went flying. The machining on the frame, at least, is excellent. Not nearly as rough as something like the Makarov. It's still rough, but not as bad as some of the others that we've looked at. My particular gun is 50 years old in 2021, and the inside looks great, I think. What do you think? There are some weird wear marks, like these scratchy ones here on the barrel hood. I'll have some pictures of those. A lot of the blowbacks from this era, Eastern or Western, they have these marks. These are from imprecisely cleaned edges and missed tool marks that kind of rub when the action is working. Even my Berettas have them. Fitment expectations, especially for a service pistol, they were very different a few decades ago. This lever here, this is the slide lock. When we insert a magazine, this pops up. You see that? One more time. See it move down. This lever or bar sticks up and sits in the recess by the breech face. And that prevents the slide from moving forward. For the most part, all of the PP style guns work this way. So why is this interesting? Well, modern guns that you're used to seeing don't have this slightly more complex, completely internal system for locking open. The slide lock lever is just popped up by the follower, and then it stops the slide via a cutout somewhere on the side of the slide. I'll put up a picture of a Glock. The Makarov has a tab that's away from the breech face and an external slide release button. Using the breech face could potentially deform it if the steel isn't hard enough. The CZ-70, though, has a little recess for the lever, which probably helps. So how does a takedown button work on the CZ-70? Though the Makarov isn't truly a Walther clone, the takedown procedure was definitely borrowed from the German design, so we're going to take a look at it to kind of compare the CZ-70. But both guns work by having cutouts in the slide that you can use to pull them off of the rail if you can slide it back far enough. And both of them prevent this from happening just by blocking how far back the slide can go to prevent them from getting to that point. So the method of takedown is different, but the procedure is more or less the same, at least what's mechanically happening. In the case of the Makarov, this part of the trigger drops down here, giving the slide clearance to line up these cutouts with these sections of rail, which can now slide through. It's funny though, the length of extra travel needed is like 1/8 of an inch, if even 1/8 of an inch, not much at all. And there isn't much rail, is there? The slide is moving on these tiny things and kept in line by the barrel and dust cover, if you can even call it that in this case. Though the Makarov's hinge trigger guard might be more like the PP, that rail arrangement isn't. Unrelated to any of the shit we're talking about in this video, but it's just kind of cool. The CZ-70 is more what you usually see with these kinds of guns, with that sort of longer section of rail back there. In the case of the CZ-70, pushing the takedown button in just gives the slide clearance to move about, I don't know, 1/3 of an inch further to the rear where it can clear the rails and lift up. See that moving there? The way this interfaces with the slide is very interesting, I think. These tabs move into the cutouts in the takedown button, which only line up when it's pressed in. So there's an internal channel in there. I'll photograph that. that's being opened by that moving inward. So the way that interface is really interesting. It's a little bit more complex than you would imagine that it would be. It's really cool. The changes from the CZ-50 to the 70 weren't big ones. It's hard to tell a difference between them at a distance. This information is certain because folks can just compare the guns, unlike a lot of other CZ-50 and 70 forum lore. The 50 has a different grip shape, perhaps a better grip shape. The magazines are interchangeable but slightly different, and the 50s sometimes have soft steel, or so the internet says. I'd like some firmer sources on that. This can cause the slide to deform or crack in places. Specifically, the deformation happens where the hammer strikes the slide back there, from what I'm told. Or so the folks online say. I haven't seen this with my own eyes. Also, some of the 70s floating around are supposedly converted 50s. I'm not sure which I have, or how to tell if that's true or not, or how to tell what exactly you've got. There are numerous other cosmetic upgrades, and for some reason, they made the goddamn magazine release button smaller. Thanks, I appreciate that. Earlier I said I modified my gun. Let's take the grips off and have a look at that. You should know, working on this gun's frame is hellish. Not because the design is complicated, but because this is the stiffest mainspring I've ever seen. Holy shit, it was bad getting that back in place. I cannot describe to you how fucking awful that was. So originally magazines didn't drop free. I'll describe in great detail why I made the modification when we talk about performance, but I could see that this little metal tab that sat in that cutout there, I don't know if you can see that. I could see that this tab prevented the magazines from dropping free. The tab had no other visible purpose, and magazine retention was all the rage in Europe at the time, especially in countries within the Soviet sphere of influence. I suspect they lacked the money for replacement magazines, maybe, something like that. So I removed the tab, and magazines mostly dropped free after that, but they were sluggish or wouldn't drop out when I was gripping the gun with some force. So I looked carefully at the grips, and I saw these little plastic fences in here. And these may do this on purpose. They were gripping the magazine. If nothing else, this fence seems to have been intended to guide the magazine as the frame is open on one side. Yeah, you see how that's just kind of open there on that one side. I mean, there's still, that lip kind of holding it in place, but the grips probably do help. Yeah, those really jump out of there now. So what I did is I took a file and I brought this material down just enough that the magazines clear it, even when I've got a good firing grip on the gun. I don't recommend that you perform this modification. I really don't think you should. I'm only showing it to you because I just thought the metal retention tab was kind of interesting. The designers, or at least whoever approved the design, felt that retaining magazines was important enough to add a piece designed just for that purpose. And I'd love to know more about this. Not hearsay or shoot you read on a forum, but real historical info. If you have it, I want to read it. Really, I want to read anything you got that's legitimate about this gun. It's also interesting because a lot of Walther PP series guns, their magazines don't readily drop free either, but they don't have that retention tab, at least as far as I know. Maybe there was a model somewhere. Maybe you know. If you do, I'd like for you to pass that information along to me too. When you put the grips back on, make sure you have this nut lined up with this cutout in the grips. It has to be on there just so. That's really kind of hilarious. That's a hilarious design choice. It's just so fucking precise. Like, why not just put a circular hole in there? It's very strange. Maybe it keeps the nut from turning. I don't know. You can see that after the modification, like one's bowels after eating a McRib, the magazines rapidly evacuate from the gun as fast as they possibly can. It's very satisfying. I could do that all day. And hey, if you eat a McRib, what choice do you have? Haha. Okay. The inside of the slide has a ton of tool marks and looks rough. Kind of like a Makarov, right? It's one of the only parts of the gun that looks that way. And a lot of blowback guns are produced in this fashion because those surfaces, they don't matter. The slide is guided by the dust cover and barrel. These surfaces on the frame and by the muzzle are well finished and smooth, and the same thing goes for this little ring where the barrel rides. Now these chattery wear marks inside the dust cover indicate that it wasn't finished particularly well, and we can see some tool marks there. I'm not sure why a little more time wasn't spent on this spot, because it definitely is going to wear there. Looking at the slide, we come to my favorite part of the design, and the most surprising part. This is also part of the CZ-70 design, if you can believe it. This gun has a firing pin safety. In the late 1940s, it was designed with a fucking firing pin safety. That's remarkable. There are guns from the 70s and 80s that don't have firing pin safeties. This really helps this gun to feel like a much more modern design. Is such a safety necessary? Truly, I'm not sure. The Makarov doesn't have one. Instead, it has a very lightweight firing pin. The older Walthers had no firing pin safety, though the newer ones do. Whether it's necessary or not, the safety is so cool to see. Drop safeties are the norm now, and we take them for granted, but in the late 1940s, on a gun like this, very few such safeties were designed. The two designers here really went the extra mile. Like a modern drop safety on a Glock or Beretta or whatever, when you pull the trigger, the hammer is dropped and this little tab pops up. See it? At least I hope you can see that. That's another one that I'll have to include some pictures for. And that tab pushes this plunger in, and that allows the firing pin to pass. Otherwise, this plunger blocks the firing pin. An intentional trigger pull is required to move the firing pin and fire around. The Model 50 was years ahead of its time. All right, so let's put the gun back together. We got to cock the hammer once more. Put the recoil spring on first. Unlike the Makarov, it doesn't click into place. It's just kind of on there, hanging out. So hold your takedown button down. Get your slide on there and pull it to the rear. I'm gonna have to pull it closer to my body to do this. There you go. Check the function and decock the gun. I wouldn't recommend dry firing this gun much without snap caps. It's not like a Glock or something modern. Use the decocker and keep the stress off that firing pin. But we're going to dry fire it today for the sake of the video and science. Maybe, but you shouldn't do that. Our gun is reassembled and the tedious discussion of minutia is over. Yay, you made it. How has the CZ-70 performed? Even 50 years after it was produced, this gun has offered flawless reliability. So far, that is. With the exception of my Makarov reliability test that purely exists as a fun pandemic activity. I'm not testing these old blowback pistols for endurance. That would just be silly. I've only put 230 rounds through this gun, which is barely anything. But it's worked with all the CZ-70 and 50 magazines I've managed to round up over the last 6 months, so, you know, that's cool. It hasn't felt sluggish or weird. I like that, and it doesn't seem to be picky about ammo. Whatever you've got, it'll probably eat it. As for the rest, what do you want? You want the bad first or the good? This gun is definitely a mixed bag, a very, very mixed bag. Okay, it's mostly bad. Oh, you know what? Let's do the bad first. Let's get all that negativity out of the way and end on a good note, a small good note. So who the fuck designed this awful grip? Why would someone do this to another person, to their own countrymen who they presumably want to succeed? As I said in the intro, this gun feels like it was designed by crab people from the Crab Nebula. So they made this squarish grip, cut this inexplicably deep section here, which is presumably for the web of your pincer, and then left out a beaver tail while making this come down and dig into the web of your hand right there. If you actually grip this like it seems like you're supposed to with the web of your hand in here, your hand is so low that there's like a gap under the trigger guard. Yet the trigger guard has an undercut, seemingly to guide your hand up against the trigger guard. And when you grip the pistol high like that in a way that feels right, there's a huge gap between the web of your hand and the actual plastic there. And then this is digging into your web there. Why? Why, crab people? Why the fuck? What did we do to you? We have not harmed you. These grips fucking suck, and the trigger is just as bad, maybe worse. I assume that crab people have great strength in their claws, and assume that us fleshy primates, though devoid of a protective and strengthening carapace, would surely be able to pull a double action trigger that is a mere 20 pounds. it's astoundingly heavy. It's awful. However, I'm proud to say that after nearly 2 decades of shooting revolvers, some of which were not good revolvers, I can make this first shot work. Do I like it? No, I don't like it, but it will hit the target, and that's all that matters. And the DA pull is smooth, so that's good. The single action pull, however, is excellent, like truly great. It's just shy of 6 pounds and very crisp. Let's take a look at the trigger pulls. Yeah, I can make that work. Not my favorite. I don't like it, but I can make it work. The single action pull, though. The usual take up and then a very firm wall. Tiniest bit of creep, but I'm being picky. You probably wouldn't notice it typically. And a very crisp, firm snap. I love it. That's really, really great. You'll feel a little bit of over travel, but just a hair. Again, I'm being picky. The trigger pull is great. Yeah, that's great. The reset is very short and tactile and audible. Nothing to complain about there. And once more. And again. Man, with the single action pull, I really struggle to find complaints. Like the Walther PP series, the single action is just fantastic. A very high quality trigger pull. And man, I've gotten oil all over the place. But unlike the Walthers and most of the related guns, the CZ-70 gives us a mean to circumvent the double action pull altogether if we choose. You can put the gun on safe with the hammer cocked and never use that DA pull. Is that my personal preference? No, I just deal with the double action pull, but the option is there if you want it, and we like options. Options are good. I think this is one of the best safety decockers on any of the tiny blowback service pistols from this era. If your hands are the right size, you can operate the lever from all positions without moving your hand. Your thumb just pushes it around. However, my hands are just a hair too large for that, so I do have to slightly adjust my grip. If this lever were maybe 1/8 of an inch longer, I'd find it slightly more comfortable, because right now I'm having to scooch my thumb back to get to it, if that makes sense. If it were a little longer, it'd be exactly where my thumb is. But it's still more comfortable than the safety on the Makarov or any of the slide-mounted options. I think it's excellent. The magazine release really kind of sucks. I'm not bothered by how small it is, and I could even work around how it's placed, but because it's shorter than the grip, you have to reach your fucking thumb around and get to it. Like that. I have to very much change my grip just to release a magazine. That happens with the Walthers too, though, to be totally fair, but maybe not to this degree. Before I took out that magazine retention tab, I had to hit the button and then pull the magazine out of the gun. And that took about as much time as using a fucking heel release like on the Makarov. So here's the benefit of my little modification. The magazines fly out of the gun. Check that out. Haha. Other than the bizarre magazine release, this is just like reloading a far more modern gun. I like it. So what about my actual shooting performance with this thing? Well, it's very easy to shoot it well, mostly. I'll save that for last because it's kind of funny. This gun is easy to shoot accurately if you can master the heavy first trigger pull. The single action is excellent, and the gun has very little recoil, as you'd expect. You can almost shoot the gun accurately as fast as you can pull the trigger. That's what makes it fun. It's almost effortless, especially after I removed that magazine retention tab. That really sped this gun up and made it more fun. But all that fun comes at a price. This gun dishes out the worst hammer bite I've ever experienced. Crikey, if you aren't paying attention and get a nice high modern grip on this thing, it's gonna bite the shit out of your hands. And remember how I said it's easy to shoot the gun fast? I'll fire off a triple and it'll bite me thrice. That's not fun, but if I pay attention to my grip, I can work around it. But I must reiterate, this is a very, very fast gun. And strangely, I enjoy it. I like it. I like how weird it is. I like how it's easy to shoot. And I like how it looks. It's a charming gun. Even though it's not remotely useful, it kind of fucking hurts. It's weird. That double action trigger pull is awful. The magazine release is awful. The sights aren't great, even for a gun made during this era. It's just kind of a curiosity, but it's a curiosity that I really enjoy. Final thoughts. So it seems like you hate this gun, right? Yeah, I kind of hate it. It kind of sucks. But I also really like it. This thing is sort of a window into the past. That's really cool. When you're handling an older pistol like this, especially an older service pistol, it's really a window into what a nation's military prioritized at the time, right? It's really cool. You can see what was important to those folks at this moment in time. I love that. But this gun also has these really cool and innovative features. This is a really good safety and decocker, especially on this kind of gun. That's excellent. You know, with the magazine release modification, this gun's also pretty damn fast once you learn to work around the double action trigger pull. And you could just use the safety anyway. So this gun can be shot very fast, very accurately, and mag changes are really not that bad once you do the modification. The sights are okay. They're really not bad. Once you get past the double action trigger pull, the single action trigger pull is excellent. And kind of a weird fuzz floating in here, like a weird fuzz jellyfish in the sky. So we've got the loaded chamber indicator. That's pretty cool. We see those on other things though. But the drop safety, that we don't see so much on something from this era. That's really cool. That's something a little bit different. So for all its problems, there's still a lot here to love. There's a lot that's cool. It's interesting to shoot this gun. And I'm always going to be drawn to something that's really interesting to shoot. There are too many boring guns in the world, right? So I think this is something unique and fun. At the time, pistols were mostly a status symbol. But it's really interesting that they still designed a pistol like a lot of other Eastern European nations did, a pistol that was small and really easy to shoot well. Anyone can shoot .32 well with just a little bit of instruction. It's a great caliber for something like this. But having this sort of window in history that is inexpensive, still fully functional, .32 is one of the only cartridges that you can still sometimes find ammo for these days. And it's not as horrifically expensive as some other calibers, though it is rising. This is a cool thing to have around. And I'm always going to choose something that lets me explore history rather than something that's, you know, you just have to hang it on a wall that you can't shoot, that's sort of no functional value in that way. This is a really cool pistol, and if you have an opportunity to shoot one of these, definitely take it. And if you're interested in this sort of thing, it might be worth picking one up, I think. I hope you all have enjoyed this rambling, awful, circuitous review, if you can call it a review of a surplus gun that was made some 50 years ago. I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and I will talk to you soon. Good night.